Hello, I'm Connor Decker, and today I'm talking about African American contributions to World War I. African Americans go into war. The United States was originally neutral in World War I. However, actions like the sinking of Lusitania and the Zimmerman telegram forced the United States to enter the war on the side of the Allies. After declaring war, President Woodrow Wilson put out a call to action to all able-bodied American men to join the war effort and serve in the armed forces. On the first day alone, 700,000 African American soldiers enlisted to fight. African Americans had many motivations for joining the war, like patriotism, defending democracy, but also to bring respect to their race. Joining the war effort meaned challenging narratives and breaking stereotypes, specifically those about Black people being lazy, hard to work with, and violent. By the end of the war, 2,290,525 African Americans had registered for selective service. African American military service. African American units were among the first troops to be sent to Europe. However, they didn't see combat, and they were mainly used as laborers and dock workers, or stevedores. Despite taking a little bit of a backseat approach to the war effort, African Americans persevered, and they shined in the roles that they were given. There's a story of a group of African American stevedores that unloaded 1,200 tons of flour at a French port in about 9.5 hours, which was a job that was supposed to take them a couple of days. This amazed the French dock workers there, and they noted the speed and efficiency that the American stevedores had. An American war correspondent wrote, "One who sees the Negro stevedores notes with what rapidity and cheerfulness they work, and what a very important cog they are in the war machinery." This shows that even the white commanders noticed the great help that the African American stevedores were to the war effort. African Americans in combat only accounted for about 11% of all African Americans who were overseas. Four segregated units, the 24th and 25th Infantry and the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, made up the bulk of the African American force that would see combat. These regiments were called the Buffalo Soldiers because of the work they did in the American and Indian Wars in the late 1890s. Most of the African American units actually fought under French command and not American command. The Harlem Hellfighters, also known as the 369th Infantry Regiment, they were part of the African American units that were sent under French command because General Pershing declared that African Americans were not to be treated as equals to white soldiers, and he gave command of the 369th over to the French, where they remained for the duration of the war. A very famous story of two privates from the 369th, Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts, goes that they were in no man's land one day, laying traps and laying barbed wire, when Needham Roberts heard a sound that he thought was a rodent or a groundhog or a squirrel at first. But he quickly realized that it was the sound of Germans advancing on them. They were cutting the barbed wire and quickly approaching their position. Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts withdrew to a small shed or like hut kind of building, and they had to fight off the Germans from there. Needham Roberts was injured, and Henry Johnson accidentally loaded a French clip into his American gun and jammed it. He then proceeded to use his gun as kind of a mallet or mace, and he beat the German soldiers with it. He then used a knife to fight off the remainder of the German soldiers who retreated into the night. The next day, when the two men were discovered, they were found with four German bodies lying next to them, and from the remnants of the equipment that the Germans left behind while retreating, it was estimated that they fought off a force of 30 German soldiers by themselves. Henry Johnson won the Croix de Guerre, and he was the first American ever to win, white or black. The Croix de Guerre is kind of the French equivalent of the Medal of Honor. After the Harlem Hellfighters gained some notoriety from famous stories like that of Henry Johnson, the US government wrote a note to the French and basically told them to implement Jim Crow laws because they didn't want the African Americans in the regiment to get used to being treated as heroes or equals to white people. They didn't want them to bring those ideas back to the States with them after the war. The entire regiment actually won the Croix de Guerre after the Maison and Champagne battle. During this battle, the Harlem Hellfighters took strategic positions and defended them from the German soldiers. They also captured key intel and passed them along to their French commanders. The Harlem Hellfighters spent more time in combat than any other American unit. They also never had a man captured or gave up a foot of ground or a trench. Being an African American in combat at the time obviously came with setbacks and challenges. Many white officers believed that African Americans would be ineffective in combat and were completely opposed to sending them into combat roles at all. In fact, one officer wrote, in a future war, the main use of the Negro should be in labor organizations. African American units were slandered when battles didn't go their way. Oftentimes, they were the victims of bad leadership or undersupplies. And when they would lose a battle, simply the story would go that they lost because they were African American, that they were black, when in fact they were suffering more challenges than any white regiment would suffer. Also, famously, awards were withheld. Those such as the Purple Heart and even some medals of honor were withheld and not given to African Americans simply because they were African Americans. There were quite a few instances of honorary awards being given out long after these people were dead. Some more setbacks and challenges that they faced were being in segregated camps. They were only allowed to be with other African American soldiers, and they weren't allowed to intermingle with their white servicemen because the white Americans didn't want anything to do with the African American soldiers. African Americans were entirely banned from joining the Marines, and they were only allowed in the Navy as laborers. Their units were very oftentimes mismanaged, and in fact, when there was something going on, many in the high command would just ignore the African American units and give them no direction at all. On the home front, many things like the Black Exodus or the Great Migration, which is where a large number of African Americans moved from the South to the North, enabled them to get lots of factory jobs. This was crucial for the war effort because they could build things like rifles, tanks, bullets, and any other munitions that would be needed for the war effort. They also followed rationing guidelines so that they could conserve their resources at home. The African Americans alone purchased $250 million worth of war bonds to support the war effort. African American women contributions. African American women were often used as nurses or ambulance drivers. They also worked in railroad offices and government offices. 23 African American women served with the YMCA abroad, and they managed leave stations, canteens, and hostess houses for the soldiers. To conclude, African Americans had a great impact on World War I, be it at home, in the home front, doing manufacturing or doing medical jobs, or abroad, fighting or doing laborious tasks.